Welcome back. The race-based referendum may be floundering in the polls, but that has not stopped our institutions from doubling down on their pro-yes advocacy. That includes the higher education sector engaging in all sorts of divisive race-based activism. University of New South Wales, for example, is hosting a First Nations Voice Support Week. Author and president of the Australian Jewish Association, Dr. David Adler, graduated from the University of New South Wales and says he is disappointed in his alma mater. He joins me now. Tell me why you're upset by this activism, David.
Rita, it is bitterly disappointing. A university should focus on education. I mean, imagine that. And to get involved in partisan, divisive political activism is not the role of a university. When I was there, certainly there was political debates on the campus. There was a Liberal club, there was a Labor club, various other interest groups. But the university stood above and distant from any partisan politics. So I find it extremely disappointing. I think it's also a surreptitious way of directing public money to the Yes campaign. I mean, universities are, after all, publicly funded, and for them to take a partisan activist role, you've got to question why are they doing it, and we can speculate about that, but it's totally inappropriate in my view.
Now, I wanted to ask you about what's happening in Israel at the moment. We've had these widespread protests. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is saying the country is not at civil war. We're getting some fairly hysterical commentary from some quarters. This is all over the judicial reforms. But I do wonder, David, are these protests genuinely about the judicial reforms, or are they about Bibi being elected again?
I think you're being quite perceptive with that. Superficially, it is about the judicial reforms, but only superficially. What's going on here is that at the last election, the Knesset was resolved 64-56, 64 to, I guess, centre-right conservatives and religious parties, and 56 centre-left leftists and the Arab parties. This is really a contest for what sort of future country Israel will be. Now, let me make it clear, democracy is not at risk, but it's a bit like the reaction of the left when they lost to Trump in America, the Not My President movement, when we saw big protests, violent protests. We currently have two leftist leaders, including a former Prime Minister, Ehud Barak, who hates Bibi Netanyahu, who's currently being investigated by the police for incitement, doing damage to the country. Now, Israel's a democracy. People can protest. That's fine. But I do really think that the protests have a much wider agenda, and that is, frankly, to try to bring down the democratically elected government.
Now, the ABC's Middle East correspondent did a report on an Australian man who moved to Judea, Samaria. The report was so biased, it was actually praised by the Hamas media arm. Has there been any pushback on this reporting by the ABC?
Oh, look, this is an extraordinary story. An Australian man called Michael Luria moved to Israel, and he's been involved in a community in Judea, in an area that overlooks the Dead Sea. And we reached out to him, and we've got some additional information that the ABC actually spent about 3 hours there doing filming, interviewing him, went to his home twice, and took about 15 seconds only of dialogue with him, which created an impression negative, and he's of the view that it was a setup. We will be speaking further with him and giving him an opportunity to speak to the Australian Jewish community. The ABC has a long and disgraceful record of anti-Israel bias, but to get praised by Hamas through their media arm is quite extraordinary. I mean, you would have thought that if your report is getting praised by a prescribed terrorist organisation, then maybe you need to review your methods. And the ABC Charter is supposed to be even-handed, but it could have been conducting propaganda for Hamas on this occasion.
David Adler, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you, Rita.